Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Be Like Christ for our 5-minute Bible study. I am really going to try to do this in 5 minutes today. The last couple have been like 8 minutes, 9 minutes. It's terrible. See if we can actually do it in 5. I'm not going to make any promises, but that's the goal. The PDF outline is available on our website for free if you want to download it for yourself and keep it and maybe share it with somebody else. All right, let's talk about our timeline first. We've been talking about Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam was Solomon's son. He became king in his father's place about 975 BC, and he reigned for 17 years. We're going to talk, first at least, about Jeroboam. He was the king of Israel, and he reigned for 22 years. As I mentioned in a previous study, we're going to start covering time much quicker. So we're going to go through the lives of these kings much quicker than we did, say, the lives of Saul, David, and Solomon. Okay, as far as our characters, we have a guy named Ahijah. Ahijah was a prophet of God. He was the one who prophesied that Jeroboam was going to become king back in the days of Solomon, 1 Kings chapter 11. You got Jeroboam. He was an Ephraimite. He was originally a servant of Solomon's. God selected him to be the king over Israel when the nation of Israel and Judah divided. Then we're going to talk in this chapter specifically about Jeroboam's wife and his son. His wife's name is not given. His son's name was Abijah. So we have Ahijah, the prophet, and Abijah, Jeroboam's son. It's easy to get those mixed up. Then finally, Rehoboam, Solomon's son, and the king of Judah, the southern kingdom. We're not going to be in Jerusalem for the map today. We're actually going to be in Shiloh. Ahijah, the prophet, was in Shiloh when Jeroboam's wife visited him. Jeroboam, his wife, and his son lived in Tirzah, or at least that's where they were located in chapter 14. Okay, now let's go over to our outline to page number 2. Our first section, verses 1 through 18, Jeroboam's sick son and Ahijah's prophecy against Israel. So Jeroboam, the king in the north, his son Abijah became very ill. Jeroboam told his wife to disguise herself, to take a gift to the prophet Ahijah, and to ask him what was going to happen to their son. Would he get better, or would he, not get better? She probably had to disguise herself because Jeroboam wasn't exactly in good standings with God or his prophets at this point in history. Now Ahijah, he couldn't see very well because his eyes had gone bad because he was old. But God revealed the identity of his visitor to him. He told Jeroboam's wife that he had unbearable news for her when she came to him about her son and about her husband's kingdom. Since Jeroboam didn't listen to God, promoted idol worship, and turned away from God's statutes, God was going to turn away from him and, quote, bring harm to him. God, through his prophet, cursed Jeroboam's household, telling his wife that his relatives in the future who died in the city were going to be eaten by dogs. His relatives who died in the country were going to be eaten by birds. He said that only Jeroboam's son was worthy of receiving a proper burial. Now, that wasn't really a blessing because it told Jeroboam's wife what was going to happen to her son. He was going to die when Jeroboam's wife re-entered her city. Ahijah prophesied that the nation of Israel would be uprooted from their land and scattered, so they were going to lose their place in the promised land. That's quite significant. Jeroboam's wife then returned to Tirzah, and just as Ahijah said, her child died as she entered the city. This is pretty much all that the text of 1 Kings tells us about the reign of Jeroboam because, verse 19 through 20, we're going to talk about his death. A record of the acts of Jeroboam was recorded in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. We're told that he died after reigning for 22 years, and he was replaced by his other son, whose name was Nadab. Our last section tells us what happened to the king in the south, Rehoboam. Summary of Rehoboam's reign, verses 21 through 31. Rehoboam became king over Judah when he was 41 years old, and he reigned for 17 years, so not quite as long as Jeroboam. Judah was ungodly during Rehoboam's reign. They worshipped idols, and they acted like the pagan nations that Joshua had previously driven out of the land. In Rehoboam's 5th year, Shishak, the king of Egypt, plundered the city of Jerusalem, and God allowed this to happen because of their unfaithfulness, taking all of the treasures of the temple and in the king's house, and he took the 500 golden shields that were made by Solomon. Rehoboam then remade those shields afterwards, but he didn't remake them out of gold, he made them out of bronze. And the text tells us that there was continual war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam, Israel and Judah. Rehoboam died and he was buried in Jerusalem. And so that ends the life of the first kings of the divided kingdom. Just so you know, I am going to keep track of the kings try to make a timeline, because if you've ever studied the Old Testament, one of the hardest things to do is to keep track of the kings of Israel and Judah, because there's a bunch of names, they're unfamiliar, a lot of them are just appear, very shortly or very briefly in the biblical narrative, and also some of the kings have multiple names, which makes it even harder. So I am going to try to make a list, which I will give to you as we progress. Will we make it in 5 minutes? Just to make sure that we don't, I actually have 2 applications from the text today, just to thwart myself. Application number 1. How metaphorical is it? The plundering of Solomon's golden shields and the withdrawal of God's protection from the nation of Judah. This should be instruction to all civil leaders and to all citizens that every country, no matter how great it has been in the past, is vulnerable to an almost instant collapse when they walk away from God. Judah fell from the world prominence of Solomon's day to, the somewhat insignificance in Rehoboam's day. That's just one generation. Don't be foolish enough to believe that God lacks the tools to repeat that pattern in the modern day for nations that walk away from him. I think a lot of people have the idea that, maybe my nation, it's not as godly as it once was, but it's still pretty great. I don't think we'll see its downfall in my time. Don't necessarily bank on that. Here's the second application. It's better to repent of sin in humility than to stubbornly try to keep up appearances out of pride. Rehoboam tried to keep the appearance of the success of the nation by recreating the stolen gold shields. His lesser bronze shields may have fooled some people. Maybe it fooled himself. But he would have been better off if he had just repented and turned back to God. And the same is true for you and me. If you've sinned, confess it in humility and ask for God's forgiveness. That's the way to future success. Don't try to cover it up just to keep up appearances with the church folk.